It's Purple Daily.
Okay, good morning. Matthew Collar, Sage Rosenfels here. It is 36 hours of Purple presented by Dennis Kirk and the Canopy Group. It is a beautiful, beautiful day. I was walking through our parking lot and I looked up at the sky and there was not a cloud in the sky. And the gods whispered to me, draft day. It is indeed draft day. Sage, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing very well today. Very excited to see what happens tonight. We've been discussing what may or may not happen for months now, and the Vikings have 2 first-round draft picks, and they have multiple starting spots in need to be filled, and we will know a lot more of those answers in the next 24 hours.
Okay, so I have my home run scenarios that I wrote for scorenorth.com that I think if they came away with any of these 5 situations, then we would say the Vikings did great. So let's start the show by going over those, and you can tell me if you agree that these would be home run scenarios. All right. So I think if they land a tackle and a corner at 22 and 25, and they don't trade or they don't do anything else, they just take Josh Jones and Jalen Johnson or any combination of whatever tackle they like and whatever corner they like, I would sort of go, all right, good job, Vikings. You did what you were supposed to do here, and you came away with your 2 top needs in the first round. You get an A. Do you agree that it would be a home run scenario to come away with an offensive tackle and a corner?
Yeah, I believe they would be very happy with that. I also believe you could replace one of those guys with wide receiver. Everyone knows they are in need of a number 1 wide receiver right now. So I think any combination of those 3, also defensive end is obviously a position that they need to fill too. So I think, with the 2 picks in the first round, they're going to try to find 2 starters, and it's going to end up being this not best player available, but it's almost like best player of the needs we have available.
Which are many.
Which are many, 3 or 4 spots you think they could easily draft. So I think it's just going to be how things sort of unfold in that first round, how many receivers go early, how many DBs might go early, offensive tackles, and you just sort of see which one of those guys falls. And there might be a guy that they have on the board as a top 10 pick that for whatever reason other teams just aren't interested as much, maybe doesn't fit their scheme as much for the position that they need, whatever it might be. And that player works its way down to 22 and 25. And now the Vikings get a guy that, they weren't expecting to get, and they have to take him because not only they need that position, but, maybe they were thinking corner, but when you get a wide receiver who's their second on their board as in this draft with a very deep wide receiver class, this might be the chance to take him with one of those first 2 picks.
And you are spoiling one of the home run scenarios by saying that. I'll get there eventually. On the defensive end point, that's where I would say, okay, not bad, but I don't know if I can give you a home run. And the only reason is, well, there's 2 reasons. First, the defensive end class is just underwhelming. So K'Lavon Chaisson is kind of a boom or bust guy. I'm not sure that you want a boom or bust guy at 22 or 25 when you have all these positions of need. Epinesa, you like, but a lot of the draft people think that he might end up being a 3 technique, or he's kind of an in-between type of guy as he projects to the NFL.
He seems like a lunch pail guy to me, if that, old phrase of, he may not have the freaky numbers, but he's going to be a good player. I mean, he's not going to be a bad player. I could not imagine. And that's why I like him. He's going to be the minimum, a solid player, and I think could be very good. I just saw him dominate Ohio State left tackles.
Mm-hmm.
I saw him dominate all types of guys in the Big Ten Conference, which is a pretty good offensive line conference. And I just think that, I don't know if he'll dominate the NFL, but I think he'll be a good, consistent NFL player. It won't be a big bang or bust, type of scenario with him.
So he's a guy that like NFL people will overthink because they don't like this or they don't like that at the combine. But when he gets out there, he'll probably be pretty good. But I also think that the Vikings have such a great recent history of developing defensive linemen who are good that I'm not sure I would want to spend a first round pick on someone who can just be okay. I would want to draft someone that only has a chance to be Danielle Hunter if I'm taking it at 22 or 25. And Chason might be that guy, but I was watching him against Andrew Thomas, and he just got swallowed up by Andrew Thomas, who is the top tackle in the draft, but also that's the type of tackle you're going to face every week in the NFL. And I'm just not sure about him. It's not like Chase Young where you watch him, he just blows through everyone. You go like, all right, I will select that man. So at 22-25, I think defensive tackle, even if it's Javon Kinlaw, I don't know about the positional value there, that usually you can sign a situational rusher either inside or outside that can go along with the guys that you have. And that position you can sort of hold serve on, even if it's not Everson Griffin that you have anymore. But it's a rotation of guys that sort of try to make up that production. I think that they can do that. And the second half of last season is really evidence because Griffin was not as good in the second half of last season, and other guys stepped up like a Fadi Adenabo. So I wouldn't say, oh my gosh, you blew the draft, everyone quit because you drafted, Jordan Elliott or AJ Epinesa or something like that on the defensive line. But I think that tackle is the one that is harder to pick for the Vikings because you have a tackle in Riley Reiff. But if you look even 1 year down the road, you are desperate for tackle, and you have to find a way to protect Kirk Cousins better than you have during these first 2 years.
And there's some good ones, like some good tackles in this draft, and one of those guys may fall. But they're different types of tackles. Makai Becton is this huge guy out of Louisville. I'm not sure how well he moves, but I think he comes in about 365 pounds at the combine. So there's a huge type, sort of the Bryant McKinney type. Then you have your Tristan Wirfs from Iowa, who's a guy that I think would probably better fit this offense. I think he's going to be drafted in the top 15 of the draft, and the Vikings won't be able to get him. But he's a guy who's super athletic, who can run, who'd be great in this outside zone scheme. So there's different types of tackles as well. You look at the big picture of this football team and of Mike Zimmer, of Rick Spielman. There's the corner receiver, the outside guys. If they go out and get two outside guys, we probably think, they need a corner, they need a receiver. But we all know this game is won in the trenches. And anytime you can improve your offensive line, and anytime you can improve your defensive line, it doesn't really make any sense. Hey, we got this great wide receiver, but we can't protect Kirk Cousins. So what's the point? Hey, we got this great corner, but we can't stop the run. So what's the point if we get no pressure in the pass rushing? So I think it's never a bad idea to pick those linemen, because you just sort of never can have too many. And I think that's a spot, whether it's offensive line and defensive line. If you can have a dominant group there, it gives you a heck of a chance to be successful. If you have a great corner, it doesn't always change the entire team, but if you have a dominant defensive line, man, it can really change the course of the season.
Yeah, I do think though, if they don't come away with a corner in day one, it isn't a home run, because you really don't have corners right now. I mean, and you need more. If they drafted two corners tonight, I wouldn't criticize them. I would say, all right, good job, because all you have right now is Mike Hughes, Holton Hill, and Chris Boyd. And all three of those guys have big questions. Chris Boyd has barely played in the NFL. Same could be said for Holton Hill, who missed the first 8 games last year with a suspension. So you're not sure of what his future is going to be. And Mike Hughes had his second serious injury in 2 years in the NFL. So you don't know if he's going to have durability issues going forward. And not to mention that we haven't seen a big enough sample of him actually playing football to know if he can really cover anybody. We've only seen a handful of games. So if they were to draft, Jalen Johnson and Christian Fulton tonight and say, they really want to lock down that position and then go forward and get your receiver, get your defensive end, get your tackle somewhere else, I probably would say good job.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a position of need. If they end up drafting 2 corners tonight, how many years does Harrison Schmitt have now? About 8, 9? He's not at year 10, is he?
Not yet. He was drafted in 2013, I think, or 2012. 2012.
Okay, so he's 8, 9 years, something like that. Since maybe it's Xavier Rhodes, but this would be 6 first-round draft picks on the secondary in the last 8 years or something. Yeah. Harrison, Xavier, Trey Waynes, Mike Hughes, now maybe a corner or two tonight. So they have drafted a lot of players for the secondary. This is Mike Zimmer's specialty. He loves the man-to-man coverage. He loves putting a lot of the weight of the defense on those corner guys to be able to cover. It's hard to find good ones. Xavier Rhodes was a dominant player for a number of years. I mean, he really was. I remember, I think it was when U.S. Bank first opened, and the Vikings were playing the Packers at home, and there was nowhere to go with the ball on Xavier Rhodes' side. He was absolute shutdown, and then Rodgers had to hold on to the ball a little bit longer, and then they were getting all types of pass rush on him. So, the cornerback is a very, very important position for this style of defense more than maybe some other styles of defense. If you're a Tampa 2 defense, you can get away with a guy who's sort of serviceable, who might be maybe in a backup on other teams as long as he's a good tackler and he can come up and run support, or maybe even a cover 3 guy who sort of has help underneath him. But when you're a man-to-man style of defense, which this defense is, you got to have excellent corner play.
All right, so my next home run scenario for the Vikings, where I would give them an A if they did this, would be to trade down from either 22 or 25 into the early second round or the late first and pick up another day 2 pick, whether it's a second rounder or a third rounder. I would still say good job, because this draft is so filled with talent in the late first to early third rounds, and especially at the positions that the Vikings need. Every time we've done a draft sim, or every time you look at a mock draft that goes into the third, fourth, or some people do all 7 rounds, which at that point, oh my gosh, you've had to spend a lot of time on that mock draft. But every time I look at that and look at the players who are ranked as second and third rounders in this draft, I just see good fits and very talented prospects that a lot of the experts like. And I think if you're the Vikings, you can get a very similar prospect, say, at 25 as you could at 34 for what you need. So you can basically move down and gain something without really losing anything.
Yeah, I think people look at the draft as, the 32 picks roughly in each round. But sometimes I look at it as you have this sort of top 5 group, the freaks of the Chase Youngs of the world, who are like, this guy obviously is the best guy, or he looks like he's a superstar in the waiting. And then you have sort of that after that period, after the top 10 up until mid to late second round. I always love during the college football season when they're talking about, let's just say they're talking about a wide receiver for a certain team, and this guy looks to be a first round draft pick in the upcoming draft. They say that about 100 guys.
Yes, yeah.
All right, a lot more than 32 guys are first-round talents, and Bill Belichick has known this for years. The difference between the 20th pick and the 35th or 40th pick isn't really that much. They're all good football players. Second-rounders are good football players. Mid to late first-rounders, good football players. And, of course, there's misses in there too. But you have these premier guys at the top. Then after that, it's if you can move down a little bit and still get your guy. And I liked how earlier, maybe it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, you talked about the Vikings trying to get 2 wide receivers.
Yes.
Maybe in the second, third round, type of area, which they've had great success at wide receiver, not in the first round. That's what they've had better success undrafted almost than their first round draft picks. But to move down a little bit, because there's a lot of quality players in the second, even the third round. And maybe their maybe rather than 6'3", the player's 6'2", and that's why he's not a first rounder, because he hasn't checked some box or something like that. A lot of quality players in that second round. I also always feel like the second round guys are the guys that have great production in college, like AJ Espinosa. Great production, not great combine numbers.
Right. Yep.
I like the great production guys, because that usually does translate to guys that are productive at the NFL level, and maybe they're not superstars, but they're really good football players. And you can never have a team with too many of those guys. And again, I know Belichick's had Brady and a lot of different deals, but he has been fine getting out of that first round, because they're always late. They're always the 30th pick in the first round or something. He has been fine going, hey, I'll take another third or fourth round draft pick and move to the 38th or 40th spot. Fine by me. And then they accrue all these picks. And picks are important for a number of reasons. And at the very minimum, they're inexpensive players. That's a great thing. You're going to have them for 4 or plus years and not have any sort of contract issues. That's a relief. And then you also get to pick players who are raw, but a guy like Belichick, for example, they get to teach them whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
They are
Yep.
sort of dealing with a little bit of a blank canvas there, and they get to fully ingrain this player into their system rather than some free agent from somewhere else. So there's a lot of reasons to move down to, later in the first round, into the second round. I know some teams like to get up into that first round, into that late first round sometimes, because you get that fifth year on the contract.
Yep.
And say, I remember the Vikings that was a Teddy Bridgewater,
Yes.
but they moved up in the first round just for that reason, to get that extra year. So there's various reasons to move up and go back, but you see a lot of those teams at the end of the first round more than happy to go, we don't have any pick in the first round, let's move back. Somebody gets antsy, and they've already made their choice. They're the third pick in the draft. They've made their choice. They got the third pick in the second round. They say, we want a little more action on this opening night of the draft, and they move up from the 35th pick to the 29th pick. They get somebody. They get the A across the board from all the draft analysts, and they had the best. They had the best draft, but they're always the worst team type of deal from all the experts on all the networks. And so it's going to be, by the way, a very interesting way to watch the draft tonight. Probably the only time we ever do this, but obviously the players are all going to be in their own places. No one's going to be in New York. I think there's a whole bunch of various sort of outlets that are, since it's on TV, but it's sort of not on TV in a sense. But I think there's a whole bunch of like people on Twitch and people on these various other networks sort of live covering this thing. So, per usual, I think the NFL will still do very, very fine with the ratings for the NFL draft, despite the fact that it's pretty much all going to be no different than a fantasy football draft.
Yes. No, I'm really looking forward to how they handle the broadcast. The WNBA draft just the other day went off without a hitch, so it was totally fine. And if the NFL can't match that with a much larger budget, then it'll be kind of funny. Circling back to your point on the wide receivers, just recent history points really well to drafting receivers in the second round. Last year alone, Deebo Samuel and A.J. Brown are probably the two best of the entire class. Marquis Brown, the first receiver, turned out to be okay, but Deebo Samuel and A.J. Brown were huge difference makers in the first year. McCole Hardman for Kansas City, had they not had kind of a deep stable of receivers, might have had a bigger role, but an impact player. Then DK Metcalf drops. Deontay Johnson for Pittsburgh ends up being one of their top receivers. And Terry McLaurin that Washington got out of Ohio State in the third round might be the best receiver in the entire class long term. A very, very talented guy. And
the kid from Washington.
Yeah.
He had a heck of a year.
Yeah, and that's a third round pick.
Yeah.
And the year before that, DJ Shark, who is for the Jaguars, he's their top receiver. He's a second round pick. Michael Gallup is a third round pick. Christian Kirk for the Cardinals, he's a second round pick. I mean, so, Cortland Sutton might be the best receiver out of the 2018 class. He was a second round pick. So it sort of speaks to that theory of getting guys who might not have something in their physical makeup or whatever it might be that drops them to being a second round prospect. But that's a great area to get receivers.
And they're just more people in general who are the receiver types than there are the left tackle types or the defensive end types. Just in, the defensive ends Danielle Hunter's a freak of nature. And there's a lot of guys like him around the league, but around the world, there's very, very few. And the receiver position are guys that could have played good basketball players. There's a lot of those types of guys. And they're looking at, maybe 10 wide receivers drafted in the first two rounds from some of the things that I've seen. This is a very, very deep wide receiver class. Obviously, the Vikings need a player, if not two, at that position. And we both think they will pick somebody in those first three rounds, if not two at wide receiver. But I do like what your thoughts are. Let's not go as a first rounder to the wide receiver position. They didn't have much luck, earlier with Laquan Treadwell a few years ago. Let's go corner. Let's go offensive tackle, even defensive end tackle. Let's do those positions. Maybe try to get a receiver in the second or third round. That sounds good to me.
Okay, so my next two home run scenarios is trade Anthony Harris tonight for a second round pick. If you can get someone to get desperate and give you a second, then you've done a good job. Or trade for a current star player with number 2 or 25. If they trade for a current star player tonight, and that doesn't necessarily mean Trent Williams, because that might be giving up too much for Trent Williams, but there are guys that all of a sudden show up on the trade block that you don't know about. So yesterday there was a report that Juju Smith-Schuster is on the trade block. And I mean, if you traded,
Really?
yeah, I mean, it's just a report, and who knows whether that's something that could actually happen. But if you traded number 25 for Juju Smith-Schuster, I'd be like, okay, you get an A for the night. You draft 22 and bring in someone who's a very, very good wide receiver to go along with Adam Thielen. That's a home run for you.
The thing about drafting somebody like Schuster is, he's a starter. Like, when you draft somebody, you don't know they're going to be a starter. But when you trade for somebody and they've been a productive starter already, you sort of know what they are. They're going to fit in right away. They can play right away. But, we all know the draft is a bit of a crapshoot, and there's no such thing as a can't miss prospect. I mean, remember Robert Gallery out of Iowa, who everyone thought was he was a number 2 pick. I don't remember who the number 1 pick was that year. It's about early 2000s, maybe 2002, 3, 4, and everyone had him as sort of the second pick of the draft. He's going to be the guy. Was it for the Raiders? Maybe, I think, but it was like he's going to be a 12-year left tackle. Now he ended up, in being this great player because everything about him said he's going to be this consistent great player.
Yes.
And he actually ended up being a good player. But he, I think they ended up moving him to guard, and he had a nice, 8 or 10 year, maybe even more career. I mean, it was a nice career, but he did not end up being that can't miss prospect that everybody had him as the can't miss prospect. And you just don't know when you're dealing with the draft. You know what you get when you get a trade. Because that guy has already had some years of experience.
Yeah, the only issue is just you run into the salary thing where you're going to have to pay this guy, or another team is probably moving someone because of a contract thing. So the intriguing name to me is Jamal Adams. If you want to, who is it? Was it George Costanza says, if you want to get nuts, we can get nuts. Like, if,
Yeah.
Jamal Adams is, all right, you want to get nuts? Like Jamal Adams and Harrison Smith would be the craziest thing in the world.
But the thing about the draft, it's not just draft time; it's like transaction time. It's one of those scenarios where everybody in the NFL from all 32 teams, they're all in their own. I mean, normally they're in a room, of course, but they're all sort of together in their own conference. Virtual or cyber conference rooms at this point, but this is where everyone's making decisions and what should we do, and we can do this. It's all sort of happens at once. So it's not just about draft, it's about transactions, which sort of goes to what you're saying. There might be some trades going on, and the Vikings might be a part of it. Normally, Minnesota, not a team that is that makes a lot of transactions. They don't go out and spend a ton of money in free agency unless they really have a guy they absolutely love, but they're not, the old Dan Snyder Washington Redskins that continually have always done that and try to make this splash. They don't do that. They try not to overpay in free agency. They're not one of those teams that are 25th in the draft and they give up all 7 draft picks to move up to the 3rd pick like the New Orleans Saints did with Ricky Williams. But this year does feel like a year they have some moving pieces here that could be, transaction type things. And one of those, Anthony Harris, one of those is could they possibly do like a Trent Williams trade at the left tackle position? Is there the money there? There's Anthony Harris money versus, all these different things that go into it.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the draft picks that they desperately would want more of. So it's a very transaction 3 or 4 days for Minnesota.
Yeah, it definitely could be. So, I mean, I would justify pretty easily a trade of one of these, for a player that is currently good, even if you have to figure out some sort of contract thing with that player, because you have a quarterback who's in his 30s under contract. You have star players all over the field with Thielen and Dalvin Cook and Danielle Hunter and Harrison Smith. I mean, it's not a tanking team that's just trying to rebuild around draft picks. So you can go and get another player to add to the mix to replace one of the guys you lost. So let's take